My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/campaign to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Move your career further, faster in just 2 days with a Harvard Professional and Executive Development Program. Advance your leadership skills, craft smarter business strategies, build your network, and transform how you work and think to keep your career moving forward. You'll earn a certificate and can add Harvard to your resume with Harvard Professional and Executive Development. Learn more at professional.dce.harvard.edu/Spotify.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. At Mint Mobile, we like to do the opposite of what Big Wireless does. They charge you a lot, we charge you a little. So naturally, when they announced they'd be raising their prices due to inflation, we decided to deflate our prices due to not hating you. That's right. We're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
The time has come for Amarantha's third and final trial, and Feyre is faced with the impossible task of murdering not only innocents, but also the man she claims to love. When Feyre succeeds to both complete the tasks and solve the riddle that will set her and the Spring Court free, Amarantha kills Feyre in anger. As her human life ebbs away, Feyre is faced with the undeniable reality of just who is and who is not willing to fight for her, only to awaken to a startling new life.
The views expressed by the hosts are entirely their own and in no way represent the thoughts or intentions of the original author. This podcast is a discussion shared to spark thought and conversation on the characters and themes of this novel.
Though the hosts speak mostly within the constraints of this book, series spoilers may be discussed with or without warning.
Explicit language as well as themes of sex, violence, abuse, and depression will reoccur throughout the podcast. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to Book Talk for Book Talk, a podcast where we deep dive into the writing of your favorite novels.
This season, we are exploring Sarah J. Maas's most controversial novel in the Court of Thorns and Roses series. This is Jack.
And I'm Amy, and this week we're discussing chapters 42 through 46 in A Court of Thorns and Roses. The overarching question for this week is the human heart weak? And to bring back a question from episode 1, does this book convince us that where we end up is believable?
Themes that we're going to see are guilt and trauma.
So as we enter chapter 42 of A Court of Thorns and Roses, this is the night before the final trial. And as per usual in Amarantha's court, there is a party with a lot of wine and a lot of dancing.
Sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. That is Amarantha's theme. Unlike some of her first experiences in court, Feyre consents to Rhys's use of wine because of her overwhelming sense of despair. Or is it because she trusts him? On page 376 it reads, "I waited for Rhysand to beckon me to drink the wine and dance, or do whatever it was he wished of me."
I love the question of, is she doing this because she's so over life or because there is a certain amount of trust to Rhysand? Definitely, I think there's a little bit of both, but I hadn't thought of the idea of like, all right, whatever, he'll take care of me.
I definitely didn't think of it that way the first time I read the book, but having just come out of chapter 41 where they've established this trust, it does beg the question whether or not she's willing to go with his whims because there's more trust between them. However, regardless of whatever amount of trust Feyre has in Rhys, she still is depressed and she is still despairing at this thought that there's this last trial and she's pretty sure she's going to die. And quite frankly, she's ready to die without even trying to fight back. I just wanted it done, she thinks. I wanted the wine to carry me through this last night and bring me to my fate. So Feyre is standing in a corner despondent, and Tamlin oh so subtly walks by and touches her.
It was giving me some like real Pride and Prejudice moment when like the hand graze.
Oh yeah, right? Yeah, in the Keira Knightley 2005 version. Oh, yep. Totally. And when Tamlin touches her, Feyre all of a sudden comes to life. I lived in that moment. My life became beautiful again for those few seconds when our hands grazed. What's crazy to me here is that she's fallen to Tamlin's level of resignation about life. Okay, whatever, I'm here to go through the motions, which is why this one moment she's able to accept it as a beautiful thing rather than, you know what, this is something I want forever, so I'm going to go fight for it.
There's a really great arc here between the beginning of the chapter with Feyre just being over life and just feeling so done with it to this actual moment of wanting to live for Tamlin again. And again, Sarah J. Maas does a great job of me believing this quick turnaround of Feyre's feelings. And while I don't agree with you, Feyre, for the reasons to come alive again for a single hand touch, but you're trapped. I get it. I'll allow it.
She's taken what she can get, which isn't a lot when it comes to Tamlin. Like, he is causing some major emotional whiplash for me. So at the start of the chapter, Feyre says that it had become difficult to look at Tamlin in recent days. Why is this? Why is it so difficult? So when I first read it, I felt like Feyre finds it difficult to look at Tamlin because it aggravates her current level of despair. What do you think, Jack?
I kind of interpret it more as like a shameful thing. Looking at him is shameful, right? Everything that he's become, like, I think she takes on his shame. And then I also think that she's ashamed of herself too.
I love what you said, that she takes on his shame because he's not capable of owning his shame.
He's not capable of owning his own shame. You're right.
Yeah. Ooh. We didn't discuss that beforehand.
Yeah.
So when Tamlin passes by Feyre and Feyre, like a puppy, follows him into a dark room.
Like all puppies follow people into a dark room.
Mine does. Instead of helping Feyre escape or, help her live through tomorrow, instead he kisses her and is unnecessarily violent. And my question is, are we convinced that this is love and romance, or is this possession and animalistic?
I don't know. I feel like I need to hear it, Amy. Read it for us, please.
All right. On page 378, what I felt was wild and hard and burning, and so he was with me. Our tongues danced, not a waltz or a minuet, but a war dance, a death dance of bone drums and screaming fiddles.
Maybe I've never been trapped underneath a mountain with Faye before, with a final task and the world on my shoulders, depending on if I pass or fail this thing. And I can't imagine what a war dance kiss is like, but I can say it's most likely very wet.
It sounds like a lot of drool going down my chin.
Like, I can't, like, you can't see, I'm moving my tongue, right? Like, I don't know what a tongue war dance is.
It's tonsil hockey, right? That's what we used to call it growing up.
Yeah, it's just a lot of drool happening. You're right.
Yeah. So as Tamlin and Feyre are making out in the dark, Rhysand comes in and finds them, and he calls it shameful. I would agree. It is very high school or middle schoolish of them. What is interesting about this moment, though, is that he brings light into the room, and he brings light to Feyre, which is something we're going to see again before this book is done.
Oh my God, such a good point.
At this point, Tamlin doesn't step away from Feyre, but as soon as Rhysand starts making threats, he separates himself from Feyre to keep himself clean. Are we convinced that this is for Feyre's sake?
No.
I haven't even read the quote, and Jack's like, no, absolutely not. So when Rhysand mentions Amarantha might hurt Lucien when she finds out that Tamlin was dallying with Feyre, ever so slowly, Tamlin removed my hands from his body and stepped out of my embrace. Tamlin looked at me and, to my horror, did as Rhysand instructed. The paint on his hands and clothes, paint from me, vanished.
He's doing this for Lucien's sake. When the second Rhysand walks in, like, he should have jumped away from Feyre. And it isn't until Rhysand says, like, hey, Lucien, Amarantha will take out his other eye. That's the moment he steps away. But I just want to, like, go back to your quote where Feyre says, to my horror, he did as Rhysand says. Feyre is not here for any punk-ass bitches.
No.
Like, it's funny how much she just really hones in on the times that she's shocked that Tamlin is willing to obey or do what other people say. And it's just another moment of, okay, like, he doesn't even say anything.
No, he doesn't. This is where I would say he's the puppy, not Feyre. As soon as he thinks there's a threat to himself or Lucien, who I would argue is more important to him than Feyre,
his real love of his life,
he submits. He's very submissive to whomever he views as holding the most power. And because of this, he very easily removes his emotions from the situation. In contrast, Feyre is extremely ashamed and desperate because of this reaction. Later on, when Rhys is kissing Feyre and Amarantha and Tamlin enter the room, a mask of stone slammed down on Tamlin's face, void of feeling, void of anything vaguely like the Tamlin I'd been tangled up with moments before. I kept my mouth shut, even as I could have died for shame, even as I ached to explain. Tamlin had to realize the truth.
Girl.
Yeah, it's so sad. I've mentioned this before. This reaction, on one hand, can be viewed as a lover hoping that her lover trusts her, but at the same time, it's also very indicative of an abusive relationship. Like, she doesn't have to explain herself here, but she feels the need.
It's obvious. Like, the second Tamlin is walking back, he should be freaking out thinking, oh no, I just left Feyre and Rhysand there. What's Amarantha gonna think? He's with Amarantha. He should be freaking out that Amarantha is about to find Feyre.
Oh yeah, absolutely. He's just so possessive that he can't even be grateful that Rhys covered for both of them. And you can tell that Tamlin's not even on the same line of thought as Rhysand and Feyre. Because Feyre looks to Tamlin, but he was stalking away for his usual throne on the dais, keeping his back to me, as if he couldn't stand to look at me. This man is just rage incarnate. There's nothing else about him. And for some reason, Feyre can't see this, and we only glimpse the intensity of his violence through other people's eyes.
Call back to Feyre mentioning Tamlin's temper and the fact that he's not a reasonable person. He doesn't have sense or understanding. And I would like to just have a moment to recognize that if this was Rhysand and Feyre from the get-go, they would have solved this in like chapter 10. Like,
honestly, I think Rhysand would just play charades with her until she got it. Like, he's not talking.
Or like, you know, teaching her how to read and then leave quotes, like leave things to write in there. Like, I will solve this curse.
Yes.
I will love Rhysand and break this curse. Tamlin's like stupidity made this book because it would have gone faster if it was Rhysand.
Absolutely. So for an example, Rhysand tells Feyre, the moment you break Amarantha's curse, Tamlin's wrath will be so great that no force in the world will keep him from splattering her on the walls. And this is absolutely true. He is predicting what will happen. Not even Feyre's death distracts Tamlin from killing Amarantha.
It's so sad, but it is true. And we'll get more into her death later because there is a lot of things not happening and happening.
Yes, lots to unpack. Before we wrap up this chapter, Rhysand is maybe, one could consider, a new and improved Tamlin. There's a lot of mirroring that takes place in this chapter with Rhysand and Feyre's interactions that I believe reflects earlier interactions with Feyre and Tamlin.
I saw that in your notes, like there's a lot of mirroring here, but I'm not sure what parts you're talking about.
So for me, think back to the infirmary scene when Feyre and Tamlin are in the infirmary and he's being a little bit vulnerable with her. Feyre and Tamlin begin to connect, and that's when we see that first threshold where they're both on the threshold. They're sharing trauma, and we see a similar moment here with Rhysand.
Oh, yeah, we do. Good job.
Yeah,
good job,
you.
Amy.
On page 382, Rhysand tells Feyre, I'm tired and lonely, and you're the only person I can talk to without putting myself at risk. So it might not be the same brand of vulnerability, but it is a vulnerability that Feyre definitely connects with. Rhysand compares Tamlin and himself at this point too, and assumes he and Tamlin have the same intentions when it comes to wanting to break the curse. Rhysand says, surely Tamlin expressed similar sentiments to you. He hadn't, Feyre thinks, not entirely. He hadn't been able to, thanks to the curse. I'm going to take a moment to say that Feyre is making excuses for Tamlin because he very could have easily said, you know, my lands are in danger and what's happening I need to prevent to save them.
Like, he might not have been able to say, hey, there's a curse, you got to fall in love with me, but he could have said, which he did kind of hint to, saying like, my lands are being affected, you know, something needs to be done, but he never said anything about like, I need to be the one to protect them. And honestly, Rhysand's giving Tamlin so much more credit than he deserves, assuming that Tamlin had the same sentiments. And honestly, I am surprised because it's a miscalculation on Rhys's part.
Huge miscalculation.
And I wonder if he knew that Tamlin hadn't expressed that, if Rhysand would have maybe driven that point more to Feyre.
Interesting.
Feyre becomes super obsessed with, I'm doing this for Tamlin, I suck so much as a human being, but Rhysand makes the point of like, hey, there's more going on. I'm doing this for my territory. It gave her a new perspective, and I think maybe Rhysand would have helped ease her guilt.
That is a fair point, that it's bigger than just her and Tamlin, and that what she's doing is important.
I think this next part, because Feyre is very isolated in her understanding of Tamlin's lands, like there's a reason why she hasn't thought of that, because Tamlin's kept her isolated. This is the dawning realization that there might have been more to his lands, and all Feyre's known is the manor. Are we seeing any cities, any towns, other people? For all Feyre knows is that maybe his entire spring court is barren and that there aren't really any fae there. And to this day, like when I say to this day, I mean, you know, the last book we have is A Court of Silver Flames. We still don't see any cities in the spring court. We've seen cities at the night court, in the summer court, and we know that there's a lot more life going on out there, but even Tamlin's courtiers, when Feyre goes under the mountain and she talks about seeing fae in masks, and she can assume that part of the spring court, but like, where were they this entire time? They hadn't, maybe under the mountain, but like, she could have met more of them during her time. Tamlin was running away from his responsibilities. He was not showing Feyre that because he didn't want to see that himself, that maybe there are people depending on him.
I think that's such a great point, and I never really thought about it, that is the spring court just a piece of empty land separating the rest of Prythian from the human world? Or is there more to it?
Out of all the courts, I feel like it would just be a really good place to live, and I bet there was a lot more fae living there pre-Tamlin. Or maybe they are there and we just haven't gotten it because Tamlin won't show us.
I could believe that. I could believe both of those things. It's at this point that Feyre really comes to understand that Rhysand has been protecting her this whole time, while Tamlin has not been. I think this is a hard adjustment for Feyre because she once thought of Tamlin as her protector. So as she's processing this kiss that happened with Rhys before Tamlin and Amarantha showed up, Feyre thinks regardless of his motives or his methods, Rhysand was keeping me alive and had done so even before I set foot under the mountain. And that's an important point, that she realizes that he's been fighting for her in some way, shape, or form while Tamlin's just been sitting on a chair. Needless to say, though, Rhysand isn't perfect, and in this way, he is similar to Tamlin. Rhysand acknowledges that he's used wine as a drug to protect himself and control Feyre. When he realizes that he's potentially said too much to Feyre, he tells her, "Perhaps I should have drugged you first. If you were clever, you'd find a way to use this against me."
Feyre has a much better understanding and clarity on Rhysand and who he is than she ever had with Tamlin.
Just by pure virtue of Rhysand being honest.
It's a lot of honesty. So before we go into this next section of this chapter, I want to have a trigger warning at the top here. We're going to be discussing sexual assault. We've talked a lot about Feyre's consent, right? And when the fact that a lot of choices are taken away from her, how she's being forced to drink fairy wine and taking away input on important choices. And Feyre's been forced to do a lot of things, but fortunately, she hasn't been forced to do anything sexually. Here we learn that Amarantha is forcing Rhysand into having sex as a power move and as a means of torture. On page 382, Rhysand says, "Imagine how you'd feel if I made you serve in my bedroom. I'm High Lord of the Night Court, not her harlot." Let's call this what it is, people. Like, it's rape. And it may not be the physically aggressive kind we would imagine, but Rhysand is being forced to do sexual acts against his will. It's a very vulnerable situation and something we typically associate with women being the victims, but Rhysand is being open about the situation where he's lost all of his power and it's making him level with Feyre, another person who doesn't have power here. Ultimately, he comes to Feyre after he's been forced. He's a mess. He needs to talk. He's lonely. And he goes to seek comfort and ends up with Feyre, and they comfort each other. This is a far more emotional intimacy that Feyre has with Rhysand than she's ever had with Tamlin. A lot of books, a lot of narratives talk a lot about women being the victims of sexual assault. So I think that it's a great call and important to point out that stereotypically we think about women, but men are assaulted too in different ways.
Going back to your point about emotional intimacy, a lot of the emotional intimacy Feyre experienced with Tamlin was really her projecting her thoughts and assumptions on Tamlin, whereas here we're getting something very real and raw that Feyre would never have projected onto him.
You're right. That's actually a great point. She hasn't projected anything onto Rhysand. He's always been his own person. Ooh, good point.
As we move into chapter 43, we are confronted with the third and final trial that Amarantha presents to Feyre. As Feyre passes by the Fae to enter the court, she is treated with honor. I want to read this quote because every time that I've read it, it's really, really bothered me, and I want to know if you see why. I had to swallow hard as a few of them touched their fingers to their lips, then extended their hands to me. A gesture for the fallen, a farewell to the honored dead. There was nothing malicious about it. Okay, Feyre wouldn't know this.
Like there's the actual symbol, the gesture?
Yeah, she's never seen it before. It's never been explained to her before. Like, how does she know this? It's always bothered me. And then it finally clicked. Is this Rhysand feeding her information directly into her thoughts? And I think that's the only way you can explain it. And I think it's actually a really subtle and meaningful clue that this bond is clicking into place.
Oh, especially since we're about to really see it in the upcoming moments. I mean, it also kind of makes you think every single moment underneath the mountain, what thoughts are swayed by him?
How much of it is her own versus Rhysand giving her information?
Yeah. I do want to have a quick comparison in this moment. At the beginning of the last chapter, there was, on page 376, no glimmer of anticipation for what might occur tomorrow. And now, even though they're sending her symbols for the honored dead, it's a sign of hope. It's an understanding that at least she tried. And, all these like Fae that might have laughed at her, pretend not to care, suddenly are kind of like, but maybe she'll do it.
I did get teary-eyed, I think, the first time I read this moment because it was really touching. But also like, fuck you guys.
Yeah. Where have you been?
Yeah. You guys should have been trying harder too.
Yes.
Once Feyre's past all the Fae, she sees Tamlin, and she professes her love, hoping that it might do something, but Tamlin doesn't react. I've wondered for a while, is this the final nail in the coffin for Feyre when it comes to Tamlin? She thinks he didn't react. He didn't even grip the arms of his throne. I suppose that was his way of enduring it, even if it made my chest cave in, even if his silence killed me. Now, we know that this isn't actually Tamlin, but I would say this is pretty believable. Because if you look at all of his past actions or lack of action under the mountain, this comes across as being Tamlin.
It's on brand.
It's totally on brand. And it's very believable that Feyre would give up on him at this point.
So the first time I read this, the brand spanking you first time, I didn't know anything what was going on was about to happen. And I actually felt like this was Tamlin. Like, we all thought this was Tamlin, but I thought this was Tamlin punishing her for kissing Rhysand. I think that as a first-time reader and in hindsight, it just speaks volumes on who I thought he was in my first impression.
I would believe it if it was Tamlin punishing Feyre.
I'm sure he wished he could punish her.
What I think is the most sad about this moment is that if you compare it to the start of Feyre's experience under the mountain, she flared up with conviction when Tamlin didn't react because she was like, I'm going to free him. He's being controlled. But now she's like, wow, you just suck, sir.
Yeah, it really is like a big difference. Like, I am Feyre and I'm here to save you all. And now, like, she's so close to actually saving everyone. She's just like, I can't anymore.
Poor girl's so tired. I would be too.
Yeah.
So now it comes to the trial, and she's being tasked with killing 3 innocents. And just the idea of it makes Feyre feel like her soul is damned. As she considers killing, she's really struggling with whether or not to do it and what are the consequences for others and for herself. I find this piece really telling. Note her priorities when she considers killing the innocents. On page 389, 3 innocents for my own future, for my own happiness, for Tamlin and his court and the freedom of an entire land. Her future and her happiness are first in that list, and they are independent of Tamlin. So despite what she's been telling herself this whole time, at the end of the day, she knows what the true priorities are, and it's not Tamlin.
But it also shows just how skewed her thinking is, right? It's not that she's doing this for selfish reasons, quote unquote selfish, but she's doing this for her sisters and to free everyone and for all the humans. It's a hard task to do, obviously, having to kill innocent people, but this is a classic trolley problem. If you're not familiar with the trolley problem, imagine a trolley out of control, right? And it's about to hit 5 people. You're either the bystander or the driver. Either way, you have the ability to change directions, but by changing directions of the tracks, you kill 1 person. What do? let the trolley do what it's going to do, or get involved and willingly kill one person. It's one of those philosophical, ethical things that people like to look at all the different variations and talk about the obvious ethically correct answer.
Is there an obvious ethically correct answer? And
you
what
kill
is
the
that?
one person.
You save 5 lives and kill 1.
Yeah. I think that's kind of like everyone agrees, like, here I am, be like, yeah, you kill a person. And everyone else is like, no, Jack, stop it. But in this moment, it's, again, easy to do it when I'm just a reader, but the answer is you kill a few to save the many. It's objectively easy to understand that, right? In the moment, it's hard to feel it, but she's not really honing into that objectiveness. I think that there might be some characters or people who can compartmentalize enough to say, this is horrible, but it's got to happen. And she's not doing that. She's really beating herself up for being, again, quote unquote, selfish.
I think that's a really good point. And I think the symbolism of being under the mountain really reflects that Feyre is so trapped in her way of thinking and is incapable of getting to the 10,000 foot level and seeing the bigger picture. All she can think about is what's immediately in front of her and
Absolutely
what her
right.
experience is.
Absolutely.
This is also reflected in her senses. Now, we know Feyre, our girlfriend, loves color and loves identifying color everywhere. But in this moment, it is going to damn her, and her senses are overwhelmed because, again, she can't disassociate. She can't see the bigger picture. On page 390, his eyes were the color of a sky I'd never see again if I refused to kill him. A color I'd never get out of my mind, never forget no matter how many times I painted it. He would never see that sky either, and neither would these people if I failed. So she's trying to see the bigger picture, but she's only focused on, I'm going to kill this person. I'm never going to be able to forget their face. I'm going to remember the color of their eyes. It's going to haunt me forever. And she wants to escape herself in this moment. Even though she's been working so hard to find herself and save her future self and her happiness, this guilt is just so overwhelming that death seems like a relief and it would be the better alternative for her.
You pointed it out. I was like, oh my God, you're right. This normal thing that she does by looking at the colors, by imagining painting, it's always been a coping mechanism for her, right? It's that sign of hope for her. It's always been a sign of comfort. And now that she's kind of like opened the floodgates of allowing herself to see the color, of seeing, all the art out there, you're right. She is damning herself. Instead of helping her, it's forcing her to not disconnect and just hone in on what is happening so much more.
And because she's honing in, she has to keep convincing herself that she loves Tamlin, because why else would she endure this or go through with killing innocent people? Also on page 390, someone in the crowd began weeping. I was taking him away from someone who possibly loved him as much as I loved Tamlin.
You're doing this for the sake of the fucking world, Feyre. Come on. That's actually in my notes. I wrote that. I'm not saying that killing the Fae will be easy. 3 innocents, but you need to stop thinking of yourself as selfish, right? Rhysand has opened up about the danger that his court and people are in. Alice has talked about her nephews. And to a certain point, Feyre wants to see herself as the villain. If you remember at the start of the book, she really described herself in negative light. And now we're seeing the extent of how much she hates herself and how much she wants to hate herself by not letting herself see the bigger picture.
That's such a good point, that she's really never been able to accept herself, and it is coming back to bite her in the ass. Before we move into chapter 44, I just have to make one more push for this idea of conversion. I talked about it in the last episode. Here we really see the culmination of Feyre's conversion. As she goes to kill Tamlin, who's the third innocent, air quotes, innocent, she realizes that everything she's overheard has prepared her for this moment. She realizes that there was such a thing as fate, because fate had made sure I was there to eavesdrop when they'd spoken in private, because fate had whispered to Tamlin that the cold, contrary girl he dragged to his home would be the one to break his spell, because fate had kept me alive just to get to this point, just to see if I had been listening. I love this, not only because of tips my conversion theory into reality, but also because she doesn't give Tamlin any credit here. It is just between her and fate.
She flips the switch here. It's a great twist. She does get to the point of going to fate, but just before this, just a few lines before that, she's thinking about all the times that she heard hints that Tamlin tried to give her hints of what was going on by letting her hear his conversation with the Adder and Lucian. And she even calls him out for outsmarting Amarantha, but ultimately she hands over herself to fate and giving fate credit.
So Amarantha is pissed because Feyre has accomplished what Amarantha did not expect Feyre to accomplish, which is complete all 3 tasks. But Amarantha's not a fool, and she did not make a promise that the Spring Court and Feyre would be free immediately after completion of the 3rd task. So Amarantha takes her opportunity to try and kill Feyre. She can't just kill Feyre, which would be the easier thing, right? She has to put Feyre down for being human.
It's like she can't even just like physically torture. She has to like really be like, and you're stupid, crush, and you're dumb, crush, and you're a human, crush. It's like, do you have to hurt me in those emotional ways too?
Yeah, right. A couple things she says. You think you're worthy of him, a high lord? You think you deserve anything at all, human? Admit what a cowardly, lying, and constant bit of human garbage you are. That's harsh. But actually really interesting. Is Amarantha wrong that Feyre's lying?
Oh, let's break that down. Admit what a cowardly, lying, inconsistent bit of human garbage you are. Other than the garbage part, she's not wrong.
She's not entirely wrong because I would say she's probably lying about the extent of her love for Tamlin. And she is kind of starting to feel things for Rhysand.
Maybe she's not like cowardly in the typical sense. Yes, she's gone to go save people, but she was scared to admit her love for Tamlin. Mm-hmm. She was lying to herself about many instances, and she is kind of inconsistent. We're Team Amarantha now.
You know, we have to play both sides. We have to acknowledge when Amarantha might be right.
Yeah.
And she might be right in this moment.
Fall has officially started here in Los Angeles, and that means we finally get to do fall activities.
I have been counting down the days for when I can go to pumpkin patches, maybe even hit up an apple orchard, and I get to do all of it looking super cute in my Quince boyfriend sweater.
This weather is perfect for my dark academia vibes, and I'm so excited to bust out my washable silk blouse because you know I'm going to be taking pictures.
Quince is known for their Mongolian cashmere sweaters from $50. And that's not all. Quince has so many other amazing things on their website.
All of those items are priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands.
That includes leather jackets, cotton cardigans, soft denim. Like my entire fall wardrobe is genuinely turning into Quince wardrobe.
By partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the cost of the middleman, we get savings as the customer.
One of my favorite parts about Quince is the fact that they only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices. And they still manage to get premium fabrics and finishes for that, luxury feeling for every item that they have.
Get cozy in Quince's high-quality wardrobe essentials. Go to quince.com/booktalk for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's Quince, QUINCE.com/booktalk, BOOKTALK, to get free shipping and 365-day returns. That's quince.com/booktalk.
Move your career further, faster in just 2 days with a Harvard Professional and Executive Development Program. Advance your leadership skills, craft smarter business strategies, build your network, and transform how you work and think to keep your career moving forward. You'll earn a certificate and can add Harvard to your resume with Harvard Professional and Executive Development. Learn more at professional.dce.harvard.edu/Spotify.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. Recently, I asked Mint Mobile's legal team if big wireless companies are allowed to raise prices due to inflation. They said yes. And then when I asked if raising prices technically violates those onerous 2-year contracts, they said, "What the f*** are you talking about, you insane Hollywood ass?" So to recap, we're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
One other thing she says to call back to episode 1, she calls Feyre a pig. You're all pigs, as in all humans. All humans are pigs. All scheming, filthy pigs. Nesta said this about Feyre too. It mirrors the beginning chapters, in case you didn't remember.
And earlier, Feyre was being threatened to be spit like a pig.
That's exactly right. Thank you for bringing that up.
When Feyre is being tortured to death over and over before she actually dies, Rhysand is the first and I believe only person to shout out her name. Or maybe not only person, but he's the first person to shout out Feyre. Not Lucien, not Tamlin. On page 399, Rhysand yelled my name again as though he cared. And for Feyre, her attention is on him because he's the only one who's actually doing anything. She even calls to him and begs Amarantha to stop hitting him as she's dying. She could be like, Tamlin, please, Tamlin, but it's Rhysand.
It is Rhysand. I love this because for the first time ever, Feyre thinks of him as Rhys, not Rhysand, just as he's trying to protect her. And in that moment, the bond is felt. The bond between us went taut. I flashed between my body and his, seeing myself through his eyes, bleeding and broken and sobbing. And I wanted to point that out in case you think the next chapter is unrealistic. After she's already died. Sarah J. Maas has actually been giving us moments where the bond is felt and experienced so that chapter 45 is realistic. As Rhysand is being beat up, as Feyre is dying, Feyre finally solves the riddle that will ensure her freedom and the freedom of the Spring Court. As she's dying, her life flashes before her eyes. And what's sad here is that it's not happy memories she sees, but all the worst of her memories as a human. This is juxtaposed by her memories with Tamlin and what the future has in store for her.
When I first read that, I kind of assumed that was Amarantha who was running that through her eyes, like all the worst parts of her life. Or do you think it was Feyre?
I really think it was Feyre. Like, I really think she had no joy prior to the Spring Court. And that's why she's fighting now, right? Because she felt joy for the first time being in the Spring Court. And when she sees the color of Tamlin's eyes, it brings her back to her happiest memory. I do think Summer Solstice at this point has been the happiest moment of Feyre's life.
Oh, yeah.
She will experience more. But I also think that in her dying moments, Feyre is still justifying everything that she's done. On page 401, she thinks, because loving Tamlin was the only thing I had left, the only thing I couldn't sacrifice. I mean, at this point, she's dying. She's sacrificed her humanity by killing innocent people. And she's done so much because of her love for Tamlin that, of course, she can't sacrifice it. Otherwise, there's nothing else to live for. And how would she even be able to justify the things that she's done? In this moment, while Feyre is dying, and Tamlin is finally free and has all his powers back, he's willing to fight for her. But leading up to it, all he says is, Amarantha, please, I'll do anything. But he does nothing.
My note, anything but fight, little bitch. He could fight, but he's not even trying at all.
Not at all until the curse is finally broken, which is really pathetic. Because at least Rhysand tried. At this point, Feyre believes that she should die a horrible death because of her love for Tamlin. And she values him more than herself, which is really sad given how little he's done for her. On page 402, she thinks, that's what these 3 months had been, a slow, horrible death. What I felt for Tamlin was the cause of this. There was no cure, not pain or absence or happiness. I'm sorry, but that doesn't sound like a healthy relationship.
There's no cure to what I feel for you.
Yeah, that's pretty awful. And Tamlin is awful as well. In chapter 45, after Feyre's died, she thinks that she has to ask Tamlin for forgiveness. She just wants to touch him and beg for forgiveness. Why?
Why? What are you doing, Feyre? Like, why are you asking for his forgiveness for killing other Fae? Like, that's what's crazy is, like, I understand wanting to immediately find the family of those Fae and apologizing to them. What does Tamlin have to do with it?
Right, because if the tables were reversed, he wouldn't be apologizing. He would be like, I did what I had to do.
Yeah.
Actually, he wouldn't have done anything. But if he did do something, he did what he had to do. Let's not forget, Tamlin knows that she wants her hand to be held as she dies. She doesn't want to be alone. But instead of being there for her, he rips out Amarantha's throat.
Rhysand does say the reason why he wanted to be on the good right side of history, but that he wanted to be there when she died.
Yeah, because he didn't want her to die alone.
Yes, and what's Tamlin doing?
Letting her die alone.
No.
And lastly, but not least, in chapter 45, before we move on, Tamlin only says he loves Feyre when he's about to lose her. We saw this before she left the manor, and now while she's dying.
Oh my God, this is such a good freaking point.
To me, this is a pure manipulation tactic.
Yeah. Like, you have to, like, hurt in order to get my love.
We're in these dire circumstances, and if I tell you I love you, then you're the asshole for not telling me you love me back.
Like, the first time she's the asshole because she's keeping it in as she's being carried away on a horse and carriage. The second time she's the asshole because she's dead.
Exactly.
Like, geez, Feyre, you could at least
take another breath and say I love you back.
What a bitch.
So now we proceed into the last chapter, and there is a lot to unpack in this chapter. What is most jarring to me is that instead of being happy that she is alive, Feyre instantly feels guilty. Mm-hmm. She cannot even complete her thought process because of the guilt. On page 407, a crowd, meaning I was still in that throne room, meaning I truly wasn't dead, meaning I had killed those I had, the room spun. To couple this jarring thought process, her new senses are just as jarring to her, and it's really the price of her guilt and her new life. My voice sounded too loud in my ears as I pushed back against that wall of black that threatened to swallow me. But every word, every breath was too loud, every smell too strong, the light too bright. I couldn't even touch my hair without the slight difference in my fingers jarring me.
I also want to point out, like, we're talking about her guilt here. She can't even look at Tamlin at first. He talks to her and she won't turn around. And even when she does eventually see him, it's his mouth, his nose, and then his eyes and face, right? And we kind of interpret that as like a romantic moment almost of like, you know, the anticipation. Is it like too good to be true? But this isn't that moment. This is a very shameful moment for Feyre.
No, that's a great point, that someone who feels guilty can't look someone else in the eye. And also, if the eyes are the window to the soul, I think Feyre doesn't want her soul to be seen right now.
Oh my God, good point. She also seems to be really resentful of being Fae. Like, this isn't a prize. She doesn't earn it. It's very much like a what have you done to me vibe.
It's really a punishment. Like, she feels she's been punished. Because she thinks it's a punishment, she can't celebrate being alive or freeing people, and she can't accept anybody's gratitude. On page 409, the high fae and fairies of the spring court knelt or embraced or kissed Tamlin, thanking him, thanking me. I kept far enough back that I would only nod, because I had no words to offer them in exchange for their gratitude, the gratitude for the fairies I'd butchered to save them. Here, in Feyre's mind, she is no better than Amarantha, who also butchered and slaughtered other fairies. Tamlin is blind to this, though. Instead of sensing how miserable she is or how she wants his forgiveness, instead he does exactly what she cannot stand. On page 410, he asks her, "How can I ever repay you for what you did?" Oh, she does not want payment.
No, she hates everything that's happening. She just died. Give this girl a break. What does he do? He doesn't like whisk her away to check in on her because she still has injuries, even though she's mostly healed, but she does talk about herself being still slightly injured. Maybe check on her mental and emotional state, you know, especially since, again, she just died. And instead, he takes her to these tense meetings initially with his own court members and other courts. And note, this is the last time that he'll take her to meetings like this. On top of all of this, he doesn't like take her home to the spring court right away. He's like, you know what we got to do? Sleep in the mountain one more night.
Because that's a great idea.
That's a great idea. It's cool, babe. You're not sleeping in the dungeon anymore. You at least get a bed.
I love what you point out about the fact that he takes her away to meetings. Feyre glosses over it because she's not really present. But I really think Tamlin's using her as a sign of power or as a token, having her present. And that's the only time that she's useful to him in that way.
Oh my God, Amy, you're right. Because he doesn't do that in the next book. He locks her up away. But in this moment, everyone is all in a tizzy. And she is the one thing that everyone can agree upon.
And I think Tamlin uses that. In response, Feyre kind of uses Tamlin. She uses her physicality with him as a coping mechanism and as a way to drive her guilt away. So I'm going to read a lot of quotes, and bear with me. but I think that they're important. On page 412, Feyre and Tamlin are about to do the wild thing. And
The wild thing.
The wild thing.
It is wild between them.
It is wild. Feyre is being kissed by Tamlin, and it is a kiss for every day we'd spent apart, and for all the days we would be together after this, days perhaps that I no longer deserved, but I gave myself again to that fire, threw myself into it, into him, and let myself burn. The imagery around this moment between the two of them is very violent, and Feyre is not here for any gentleness. Tamlin tries to start out soft and tentative, and I have a note, is this because she's now Fae and deserving of his respect?
No.
But Feyre fires up the ferocity really quick. He let out a growl. I let it burn through that hole in my chest, my soul. Let it raise the wave of black that was starting to press around me. Let it consume the phantom blood I could still feel on my hand.
How Lady Macbeth of her.
Very Lady Macbeth. I love it. You're right. After being with Tamlin, though, she can't see the light or color in her surroundings. Nothing in me stirred. Nothing cataloged the light and colors on page 414.
This is like very Lady Macbeth and he's very Macbeth.
Interesting.
Right?
Yes.
Like he's kind of his own downfall. He gets caught up in power, gets caught up in a problem. Granted, Lady Macbeth is like, like not helping the situation. But,
Right.
I'm not saying it's a direct representation, but I see some parallels here.
I could see it.
Tell us in the comments. Or
Yeah.
message us on TikTok or something. Like, what do you guys think about that? The whole Macbeth, Lady Macbeth. Because the story of Macbeth, there's a lot of stuff that goes into it, but it talks a lot about the fates. It talks a lot about what's destined and like you're your own downfall. That is the story of Tamlin. He has always been his own downfall when it comes to Feyre. And Feyre is just someone who absolutely lives in her own guilt.
Yep. Which is why ultimately Lady Macbeth dies. She kills herself because of her guilt.
And Feyre has a very much like, hello, I'm sorry. Feyre can't come to the phone right now. Why?
Because she's dead. But despite being high fae, Feyre still has some humanity left in her, and it will not let her go. I looked down at my hands, so clean and shining, a mockery of what I'd done. It would have been easier to live with it if my heart had changed too. So, going back to your point, Jack, about how Tamlin doesn't take her back to the Spring Court immediately, I think Tamlin kind of buries Feyre under the mountain, and it's really her bond with Rhys that brings her back. As I mentioned in chapter 42, when Rhysand finds Tamlin and Feyre and their little tryst, he brings light into the room. And so the same happens after Feyre has slept with Tamlin. I knew who summoned me, being Rhys. I carefully, slowly took a narrow set of stairs upward until, to my shock, a trickle of sunlight poured into the stairwell. I hissed against the brightness, shielding my eyes. I'd thought it was the middle of the night. I'd completely lost all sense of time in the darkness of the mountain.
You say something there where Tamlin buried Feyre under the mountain. When they leave the mountain, Tamlin waves his hand and the entrance is crumbled as if nothing ever happened. It's the same thing where this version of Feyre, like Alice said, no human comes out alive in there. And the human is who Tamlin fell in love with. And that's who died there. And he's very quick to bury that without realizing the consequences.
Yeah, you're so right. And he doesn't seem to mourn that either. It's like, oh, this is great. This is the better outcome.
Oh, yeah. It's completely like, we're going to go back. Nothing ever happened. You can live forever. Yay.
Yeah, which is not the case. There are always consequences. And one of the consequences of all of this is that Feyre can't hate Rhysand anymore, because at the end of the day, he's the one that fought for her, and he has compassion for her in a way that no one else does. On page 314, she snaps at him, but it didn't come out with the snap I'd intended, not as I remembered how he'd fought again and again to attack Amarantha to save me. And like you mentioned before, Jack, Rhysand tells her point blank, I didn't want you to fight alone or die alone. And then Feyre thinks, the clincher. And for a moment, I remembered that fairy who had died in our foyer and how I'd told Tamlin the same thing.
This is the first time that Feyre's made a comparison of Rhysand to Tamlin. It may not be a direct comparison, but the spark is there.
It's at least calling it to the reader's attention so that they can fill in the blanks, because Feyre's not capable of processing this right now.
When the series first came out, everyone was very Team Tamlin. And then when the second book came out, I remember some very clear, like, how could you do this to Tamlin? You built him up and he's such a dick. Why did you destroy him? And it's like, he was always there. He was always a very flawed character. And this is one of those moments that points out just how flawed he is. But when Feyre goes out to meet Rhysand, and like she says, I hissed against the brightness of the sun. Feyre goes to meet him and she's going into the sunrise, the first glimpse of sun that she's seen in months. It's very easy to see that, like, sunrise, it's the hope of the new tomorrow, it's the beginning, and this whole thing represents the new and the future and hope. Quote, my eyes stung from the light, and I remained silent until I looked at the view without a shooting pain going through my head. A land of violet snow-capped mountains greeted me, but the rock of this mountain was brown and bare, and not a blade of grass or crystal of ice gleamed on it. Okay. The mountains that are in the sunrise off in the view is, as she calls it, violet. As in, within just a few lines later, she calls Rhysand's violet eyes.
Oh, so amazing.
I know, Rhysand is the hope, is the future. And where she is on the mountain is bare, just like Feyre. There is no ice there. There is no blade of grass, as in spring court. Nothing there is alive. And that's where she's stuck, and that's where she's going to go, is to Rhysand.
I love that you made that comparison.
Thank you. Thank you.
In this moment, even though Rhysand might represent a new tomorrow, Feyre can't really process that. But what she can see is that there in Rhysand is some of the same trauma that she has. And this is really important because shared trauma is one of the ways that Feyre connected with Tamlin early on in their relationship. And it's one of the things that draws Feyre to Rhysand. On page 414, there were shadows not of his own making that still haunted those violet eyes. And maybe it was because there was no one else to hear. Maybe it was because the shadows in his eyes would also forever be in mine. Despite that trauma, Rhysand is able to tell Feyre that she should be glad for her human heart, that she should pity those who don't feel anything at all. The Fae have constantly berated Feyre for her humanity and have seen her as weak. But at the end of the day, we're reminded that not all of Fae power is good and that the human heart is actually better, no matter how she was mocked for it. And I think that this is a really important sentiment to end on as we approach the next novels in the series, because it comes into play for how Feyre acts and influences her decisions. And last but not least, Feyre brings Tamlin home. When Tamlin was always supposed to be the protector and to keep her safe, which he did not do, Feyre brings him home to the spring court, and she acknowledges that she's the one to bring him home. And I love that this is the last thing. I don't love that the last thing we see is them in each other's arms. But I do love that Feyre recognizes that she's the one to have done this.
She's giving herself some credit here.
Yes, which is so important.
And it's so unlike her.
I think it's an important last image because of where she ends up at the start of A Court of Mist and Fury.
It is a huge contrast from the start where, she's walking away from the mountain. She defeated Amarantha. Everyone's free. And she's just like, yeah, I did this.
You go, girl.
You go,
so
girl.
Proud of you.
Like you said, there's a lot of lineup preparation for the next book, A Court of Mist and Fury. On page 415, there's been some great breadcrumbs there. Amarantha's body, I heard, had been hauled off and burned, though Jorian's bones and eye were somehow missing. Jorian's resurrection will come.
And also, in her last interaction with Rhysand, Rhysand's eyes locked on mine, wide and wild, and his nostrils flared. Shock, pure shock flashed across his features at whatever he saw on my face, and he stumbled back a step. We don't really know what this is at this point, but this, spoiler alert, is the mating bond. Finally coming to fruition.
It hurts my heart knowing that the second he disappears, he pops up in the night court, and the first things that come out of his mouth is, she's my mate. She's my mate. Like seconds after this, when Feyre is turning around, he's crying to Mor about his mate.
It's so sad. To wrap up our last episode, we asked ourselves, is the human heart weak? Jacqueline.
Yes. No, it's, this story has always had, like, it started with a human heart with the need to survive, and then the need to understand that survival means more than just surviving. It means hope as well, falling in love, being able to allow yourself to fall in love, and then wanting to fight for more and ultimately struggling with all of the consequences and the guilt. And that's just a very human thing. And I think you said it, where Rhysand gives Feyre power in her human heart. And that's what makes her really different than any other Fae, is that she's a high Fae, but with a human heart. And that will always be her strength time and time again.
Especially because we are humans, we don't give other humans credit that life is difficult.
Life's hard.
And yeah, we can be weak, but to endure and to survive is a strength that not all creatures have.
And then to ask and answer, the very first question we asked ourselves at the beginning of the first episode was, is this believable from where we started at the beginning of the book towards the end?
I think so. And it definitely took me this second and third read of the book to really appreciate all the groundwork that Sarah J. Maas does in the beginning chapters and all the character development that takes place. It's really easy to gloss over it when you're focusing solely on plot.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a lot of subtlety to these characters, the experiences they have, and how it's influencing them, because not every thought and feeling is put to paper.
Yep.
You have to read
between the lines.
You do have to read between the lines, and it is there. It is there for you to consume. You just have to be looking for it. So I do think that, yes, this book is very believable.
I think that, people laugh or joke at the idea of like a fantasy novel about fae, and, people eventually in later books call it fairy porn. But ultimately, Sarah J. Maas is a great author. There's, we've broken this book down. We've looked at it chapter by chapter, page by page. And whether she did it consciously or unconsciously, she did a great job of making this a well-rounded and cohesive book.
Thank you for listening to this season of Book Talk for Book Talk. We encourage you to rate and subscribe to our show on your preferred podcast listening platform.
We would love to hear your thoughts based on today's conversation. You can submit your comments to our form at booktalkforbooktalk.com for a chance to have your feedback discussed during a weekly mini episode.
If you are enjoying the podcast, visit our website, booktalkforbooktalk.com, to view our latest merch and to learn about supporting the show through Patreon, Ko-Fi, or Venmo.
Or find us on TikTok and Instagram at the handle booktalkforbooktalk.
We look forward to sharing our thoughts next season when we explore the sequel in Sarah J. Maas's best-selling series. Our deep dive into A Court of Mist and Fury is scheduled to release summer 2022. In the interim, we plan to share in-between season thoughts and interviews with our listeners.
Fall has officially started here in Los Angeles, and that means we finally get to do fall activities.
I have been counting down the days for when I can go to pumpkin patches, maybe even hit up an apple orchard, and I get to do all of it looking super cute in my Quince boyfriend sweater.
This weather is perfect for my dark academia vibes, and I'm so excited to bust out my washable silk blouse because I'm going to be taking pictures.
Quince is known for their Mongolian cashmere sweaters from $50. And that's not all. Quince has so many other amazing things on their website.
All of those items are priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands.
That includes leather jackets, cotton cardigans, soft denim. Like, my entire fall wardrobe is genuinely turning into Quince wardrobe.
By partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the cost of the middleman, we get savings as the customer.
One of my favorite parts about Quince is the fact that they only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices. And they still manage to get premium fabrics and finishes for that, luxury feeling for every item that they have.
Get cozy in Quince's high-quality wardrobe essentials. Go to quince.com/booktalk for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's Quince, QUINCE.com/booktalk, BOOKTALK, to get free shipping and 365-day returns. That's quince.com/booktalk.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. At Mint Mobile, we like to do the opposite of what Big Wireless does. They charge you a lot, we charge you a little. So naturally, when they announced they'd be raising their prices due to inflation, we decided to deflate our prices due to not hating you. That's right. We're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.